Perak lo yachpor daf chavav, sponsored the Refuah Shlema for Tanchum Ben Chana. A Mishnah. Mishnah discusses different rulings related to distancing a tree from a pit. Number 1. Most tree roots extend 25 amos, therefore, one who plants a tree must distance it from his neighbor's pit 25 amos. Trees with more elaborate root systems, such as carob and sycamore, must be distanced 50 amos even for a pit dug higher. The Gemara explains its roots loosen the earth under the pit. Number 2. If the pit was dug before the tree planted, the owner of the tree has to cut it down, but is compensated because the damage is not imminent. Number 3. If the tree was planted before the pit dug, there is no requirement to cut it down. The same is true if it is uncertain what came first. The burden of proof is on the pit owner. Rabbi Yossi holds, ala nizak laharchik es atzmo. The potential victim must distance to prevent any subsequent damage. Therefore, even if the pit was dug first, the tree owner is not required to cut it down. Shmuel decided in favor of Rabbi Yossi as long as it is not girei delay, direct damage. The Gemara brings an example of girei delay. Sesame seed pressers operating their press caused the mansion to shake. The vibrations are a direct result of operating the press. Therefore, they must distance the press even if a lid from a barrel resting on a wall vibrates. The Gemara distinguishes between liability for a Shabbos violation and damages. Number 1, one beating flax is not required to distance even if he injures others by way of its chaff, because the wind scatters it, not the result of his own force. A blacksmith, however, is liable for damage caused by sparks from his hammer because they scatter by force of his hammer blow, not by the wind. Number 2, winnowing is an av malach on Shabbos, even though wind separates the chaff from the seeds, because one is liable on Shabbos even for a constructive use of an external force. Now we move on to a new Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses the requirement to distance a tree from a neighbor's property, even if he did not dig a pit. Number 1, unlike the ruling of the previous Mishnah, the tree owner in this case has to distance his tree only 4 amos, enough to maneuver his plow without trespassing on his neighbor's property. If there is a wall separating the two properties, there is no requirement to distance. Number 2, the neighbor is permitted to cut roots that extended into his property to a depth of 3 tfachim to prevent his plow from getting caught in them. However, if the neighbor digs a pit, he can cut them to whatever depth necessary. The Gemara states a few exceptions to the ruling of distancing one's tree 4 amos. Number 1, Shmuel explains it applies only to Eretz Yisrael, but residents of Bavel must distance trees only 2 amos. Being flat land, plows were smaller. Number 2, Rav Yosef held the ruling of 4 amos applies only for planting trees next to trees or grapevines next to grapevines, but trees next to grapevines require more distance to prevent birds perched on trees from damaging grapes. There must be sufficient distance to prevent a bird from swooping down to the vine. Incidentally, the prohibition to cut down fruit trees does not apply when they do damage. Rav Papa qualifies the last ruling of the Mishnah allowing the neighbor to cut roots. He holds the tree owner can establish rights if his neighbor does not object within a reasonable amount of time, similar to a field boundary used as a shortcut by the public. However, this applies only to a length of up to 16 amos that absorb nutrients for the tree. But beyond this length, the neighbor can cut them anytime. The Mishnah states va'etzim shelo, but does not state if it is the tree owner or the neighbor who cut them. Rav Chizda proves it is the tree owner. The Gemara challenges Rav Chizda's proof. A Mishnah that states that the law of misappropriation does not apply to roots of a private tree extending into a field belonging to Hegdish, or a Hegdish tree whose roots extend into a private field. Rav Chizda, who holds the roots belong to the tree owner, can explain why a privately owned tree extending into a field belonging to Hegdish is not misappropriation, but not the reverse case. The Gemara resolves the contradiction of the Mishnah in two ways. Number one, the Mishnah refers to the natural new growth of the roots after consecration. The law of misappropriation does not apply to them regardless of who owns the roots. Number two, Ravina answers roots up to 16 amos belong to the tree owner, even cut by his neighbor. Roots beyond this length belong to the landowner. If you're enjoying Daf and 5, please click on the link below, subscribe, and become a sponsor. Thank you.